All right, in this video we're going to talk about converting chord charts into Roman numeral charts, which we need to know for our assessment and our harmonic analyses. So let's start with a chord chart. It's not going to be as simple as just 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 or 7, chord 7. There's going to be inversions that you need to be worried about. There are going to be secondary dominant chords and borrowed chords from the parallel minor, which it's not a super straightforward chord 1, 6, 4, 5, whatever. A little bit more involved. So let's start, and we'll start in our favorite key of C major. So I'm just going to put a random chord progression up, and we're going to convert it into Roman numerals. And I'm just going to say there that we're in C major. All right, so we have C, A minor, E minor slash B, G7, A7, F minor, C. That is a random collection of chords. It would be unlikely that will sound any sort of like a song or anything like that, or just randomly. It's not a song or anything. I don't know, maybe it will sound good, who knows, you never know. Okay, so we need to convert these into Roman numerals. As I said, some are going to be chord inversions, secondary dominants, and borrowed chords from parallel minor. What I like to do is try to find the easy ones first. Start with the nice and easy ones. And what I mean by that is just the ones that are normally in the key of C. Okay? And we can start with C is chord 1. That's a nice place to start. Like a lot of songs, they will start and end in the chord that it's from the key. A minor, we should know that. That's just chord 6. Everything else is a little bit different to what you would normally see, except for maybe E minor. I mean, E minor belongs to C. It's a chord 3, but it's got this slash business going on. Now, I might just add here, if you haven't watched my video on chord inversions and secondary dominants, some of this might not make sense because I'm not going to explain those things again in this video, but this involves those things. So if some of this doesn't make sense, go back and watch those videos. You really need to watch the chord inversions and secondary dominant chord videos before you do this, because we have those in here. So let's start. I'm going to start with this one, and this is a chord inversion. Okay, so first of all, we can start with that. We know that it's a 3 chord 3, but it's a chord inversion. Now, when we have a chord inversion or a slash chord like this, I like to write the notes of the chord that are up here. And in an E minor chord, we have E, G, and B, because we need to work out which note is on the bottom, which will tell us what inversion it is. So here we can work out, we can see, and that's the first, the third, and the fifth of the chord. So we can see that we have the 5th in the bass. That's the chord, that's the bass note. E minor slash B. So we have an E minor chord with the 5th in the bass. Now we know from watching the chord inversions video that means second inversion. And when we have a Roman numeral representation of second version, we add as subtext 6/4. Okay, so that is chord 3, but in second inversion. All right, let's keep moving. G7, that's kind of from C major, because what we would like to do now is identify any secondary dominant chords. Now, for a secondary dominant chord, it has to satisfy 2 things. It has to be a 7 chord. Yes, it's a 7 chord. And it has to be not in the key that you're in this case, C major. So is G chord in the key of C major? Any takers? Yes, it is in the key of C major. So that's not a secondary dominant chord. We don't treat that as a secondary dominant chord. Yes, it confused us because it satisfied one of the secondary dominant criteria, being a 7 chord, but it didn't satisfy probably the most important one, which is the chord can't be in the key, but G is in the key of C. So that is just a dominant 7th chord. So we just represent that with 5/7. Okay? Not a secondary dominant chord. But what about the next one? Yes, it is. Yes, it is a secondary dominant 7th chord because two things. Is it a 7th chord? Yes. Is the chord not in the key of C major? Correct. Normally in the key of C major, A is A minor. So actually one step, if you're not completely confident with your chords in a particular key, it can be useful, and I'll do this on the next example, to write out the chords in the key so that you can easily see these things. I'll do that in the next example. So yes, we can see that this is a secondary dominant 7th, secondary dominant chord, and that is represented by 5/7/ of something else. Once again, if that doesn't make sense, go and watch the secondary dominant 7th, secondary dominant chords video. Okay, if A is 5, what is A 5 of? And we do that by counting backwards from A 5 down to 1 and backwards in the alphabet. A, G, F, E, D. So A is chord 5 of D. And in C major, D is chord 2 or D minor. Doesn't really matter that it was D or D minor. So A7 is a secondary dominant chord, 5/7 of 2. Cool. We have here another chord that's not in the key of C. So because normally in the key of C, F is just F major. We have an F minor. So it's not a chord inversion. It's not a secondary dominant because it's not a 7 chord. And for what we're doing here, secondary dominant chords are going to be always going to be a major chord and a 7 as well. So therefore it has to be our third option, which is a borrowed chord from the parallel minor, which means parallel minor means C major is the parallel major, C minor is the parallel minor. So that is a borrowed chord from C minor, and it's basically just a 4 chord but minor. So that just requires a lowercase 4. Okay, hopefully that makes sense. Watch it again if you need to. I'm going to do another example in a different key. Let's go. All right, so I'm going to do G major. Random selection of chords, G major, A minor, A7. Oh, let's not do that. That's too confused. That confuses me, that one. Take that back. I'll throw a couple curly ones in here. G. So the step that I missed the first time, which can help if you're finding this tricky, is to write out the chords in G major first. Just the stock standard chords in G major, 1 through to 8. Or 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 1, back to 1. We don't have a chord 8. So let's do that now. So this, I'll do it down here. So we're going to go chord 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, which is diminished back to 1. So we write those out, remembering the key signature. So that is G, A minor, B minor, C, D, E minor, and F sharp diminished. That's our key signature, and then back to 1. Yes, you can hopefully see that. Cool, that'll help us identify chords that don't belong to G major. So that's where I always start. Okay, let's find just the stock standard chords from G major. Obviously we've got a G on the end, we can do that one, chord 1. We have an A minor, so that's a chord 2. We have some slash chords here that are in the key, like G, C, and D, but of course those are inversions. So we can kick that off by writing chord 1, but we're going to have to come back and add some stuff there. It's not as simple as that, but they are definitely chord 1. C is chord 4. D is chord 5. Not enough angle there. D is chord 5. So let's deal with those because none of the others, these are not, A7 and F do not feature here. there from somewhere else. So we're going to work that out. So let's start with these inversions. So we've got the main bit we need, but we need to add what the inversions they are. And to work out, once again, if you haven't, go check out the inversions video if you need to. What I like to do is write the notes in the chord. So in a G chord, we have G, B, and D, and that's 1, 3, 5, to work out which note is on the bottom. And in this case, it's the third, the B is the third, and we know that that's a first inversion and requires the number 6 as a subtext. Don't do this, that's wrong. That's actually a different type of chord, that's a 6th chord. It has to be subtext down the bottom there, small and down the bottom. Cool. All right, next inversion, C chord. Let's write out the notes in a C chord, C, E, G, 1, 3, 5, and which one is on the bottom? So we have C, E, G, it's the 5th is on the bottom. And we know when we have a 5th on the bottom, that is a second inversion chord and requires the number, once again, as subtext, 6, 4. Voila. Okay, one more to go. D chord. D, F sharp, A, 1, 3, 5. We can see the third is in the bottom, which makes it a first inversion chord. And that requires the number, like our one over here, first inversion. When the third is on the bottom, that requires the number 6. Okay, cool, we're getting there. So we've done our G major chords, we've done our inversions, which happen to be from G major in this particular case. Let's do the ones that don't belong in G major, A7 and F. They don't feature down here. Let's do secondary dominant first, because that's a nice easy one to pick. It's always the 7 chord, or there might be more than one. So in this case we have A7, so it ticks both boxes. It's a 7 chord and it's not in the key of G major because it would normally be A minor. So we know for a secondary dominant chord we have the notation is 5, 7 slash something, and we work out what, if A is 5, what is 1? We have to go backwards in the alphabet. A, G, F, E, D. So D is our 1 in this sort of case, and then we need to work out what D chord is in the key of G, and we can have a look down here. It's chord 5. So the A7 is a secondary dominant chord, 5, 7 of 5. Cool. All right, what is F? We've had our inversions, we've had our secondary dominants. It's not a secondary dominant because it doesn't have a 7. It does satisfy the fact that it's not in the key of G major, but for what we do here, it's not a secondary dominant because it's not a 7 chord. We always have our secondary dominant chords in this particular course as a 7 chord. So if it's not that, what has it got to be? What's left? Like in the first example, it's going to be a borrowed chord from the parallel minor. Okay, so if we're in G major, the parallel minor is G minor, and we need to work out what F is in G minor. And basically it's going to be the same here. I mean, we've got an F sharp diminished chord. It's going to be the minor version of the 7 chord, basically. G minor doesn't have an F sharp in it. G minor has a different key signature, and it doesn't have an F sharp, so it's just a normal F. So basically, this is a 7 chord, but it's major. So that's what that is. If you want, sometimes they can be a little confusing because certainly if I was reading a chord chart and it had that in it, just had the Roman numerals in it, I would go, oh, are they mean F sharp major? So I like to sometimes when it's not like this one was really obvious. Sometimes it's not quite as obvious. So I like when it's not as obvious. I like to do of G minor. I just put G minor under it, like that. Most of the time when they borrow a parallel minor chord, and certainly for the examples that we use, most of the time it's a minor 4 chord. That one's more confusing, sorry. Cool. All right, hopefully that makes sense. When you do the assessment, there are some others that we haven't covered here, like sus chords and things like that. But we'll get to that in a later video or in class. But hopefully that makes sense on how you convert it. Someone's at the door. See you guys. See you next time.